Hello, I'm Sue Andersen, grief guide and yoga teacher, dedicated to helping individuals navigate the challenging journey of loss. Welcome to Growth from Grief, where I aim to offer strategies to transition from the depths of grief to the path of healing. Whatever loss you are grappling with, here you'll discover support to ease both the physical and emotional burdens of grief. Together, let's embark on a journey towards strength, peace, and healing. I'm so glad you are here. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Growth from Grief. I'm Sue Andersen. Welcome. In our episode today, I'm going to focus on my interpretation of what grief would look like if I could actually see it. So this came about, or the impetus was from a session that I did, like a group meeting, a group session, where the facilitator asked everyone to think about if they could take their grief out of their body, what would it look like? What might the shape be? What would it sound like? What color is it? Really interesting exercise. You might want to try it yourself. But for me, early on in my grief, I felt that grief was a cloud. So when I did this exercise, that's what I sort of imagined, right? I had this imagined a cloud in front of me. And, what all of the colors, the texture of the cloud, I went through that, and it felt okay, but that interpretation was really only helped for my initial phases of grief when I looked back. So I've kind of been noodling on this for a while and came up with a shape that right now I'm calling the grief blob. And this grief blob I alluded to in the previous episode when we were talking about research on grief, the 5 stages, different areas of research, grief living in the body, how grief affects us cognitively, and a lot of research that goes on around that. And that the important takeaway from, in my interpretation, from the research really is that grief affects us physically, it affects us emotionally, it affects us cognitively, it affects us spiritually. It's our whole being, energetically, it's our whole body, right? All the layers of us. It's personal, it's not linear, and it's different for each loss. So, having that as sort of the background, I was thinking about this idea of the grief blob. And the blob is kind of an amoeba shape. So you think about an amoeba, and I like that it kind of moves slowly. It can change shape. It's amorphous almost, right? So you're just imagining this like blobby thing that's moving around. But inside of the blob are all of the emotions that you could feel, right? Sadness, shock, denial, anger, shame, happiness, joy, all kinds of emotions. And these emotions are present because they're present in us, right? And they'll surface based on something that triggers that emotion. So if you just think about yourself in an everyday situation, something's funny, you're going to start laughing. You're watching a sad movie, you might start crying. So, the emotions are in us and they will release based on what that stimulus is. So in our grief, we have all these emotions. They're kind of in this blob and they can come out at any time. If I imagine that they're all there, if you can think about all these emotions that are sort of swimming in this blob, and these emotions change in intensity. They pulsate, they echo. So as we move through our grief journey, we will feel different emotions at different times, at different intensities, and for different lengths of time. Initially, when you experience that loss, there will probably be certain emotions that come to the forefront, and they're very intense. Shock, disbelief, sadness, these types of emotions, confusion, really intense. And, when you think about it, it's a wonder that you can actually get out of bed, that you can actually brush your teeth. And in fact, some of the advice that I received when I lost my son was remember to breathe. Remember to drink water. Remember to eat something. That was it. I had to make a list. Take a shower. You can't do anything else. You're numb. You're raw in that stage. So here's the blob. Here's these emotions that are really intense in the forefront. As we allow ourselves to feel these emotions and to move through the pain, because it is painful, absolutely, then these emotions will change, right? They'll change in intensity. Other emotions might surface. So even during the first couple of years after your loss, especially if your loss was very, very intense, then, you're going to feel some of these emotions sort of pulsing, echoing back and forth. One day you might be in the depths of sorrow, and maybe that lasts for more than a day. And then the next time, all of a sudden you realize, wow, I'm not in the depths of sorrow, and I actually feel a little bit lighter. That lightness comes from allowing yourself to feel the emotion, to feel the pain, and to release it. So over time, we are giving ourselves the permission to feel these feelings. Sometimes you're going 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Sometimes, boy, you're really going back, right? You got that 3 steps back, 1 step forward. But in between these times, other emotions start to pop through. So you got all this pulsating going on. You've got this echoing of some emotions. And then every once in a while, a little bit of joy pops through. Probably the first year or the second year after my son died, I remember sitting with some friends, and these 2 girls could make me laugh. I mean, we just had so much fun when we got together. And I remember laughing sitting there with them at lunch, laughing and laughing. And then all of a sudden, I felt guilt. Oh my gosh, how can I be laughing? My son is dead. But that was okay. It was okay. I let myself, kind of go through it. I didn't, I allowed it to happen. And it was just a strange feeling. It was a really strange feeling, that laughter, that joy. And then all of a sudden, the guilt, right? Some emotions, this echoing, this intensity, this back and forth, I'm not implying that things happen and they go away and then you don't feel it anymore. I felt the emotion of guilt for so long. So, I mean, years, years. My son died in 2012. I felt these emotions for probably 8 years, the emotion of guilt. It's really a tough emotion. Anger, I felt a long time from a previous loss. I held on to it. I didn't even know it because it was now deep seated in my body, right? I didn't even know I was feeling this emotion. And then it came out when my son died. So the emotions are there. They're going to live in our bodies. They're going to live in our minds. They're going to live in our hearts. And we have to let them go. So think about this idea of this amoeba, this grief blob, where you have this, blobby shape that moves, that has all these different emotions in it that change in intensity as we move through our grief journey. These emotions will echo. So they'll be intense one day, they won't be intense. Something may be intense for a long time, something else may be softer, something else might just go away, right? We've experienced that, we've dealt with it, we've done all we could with it, and now it's gone. From our bodies, from our minds, from our hearts. And then as we move through these emotions, some of those other emotions like happiness and joy and purpose, now those start to come to the forefront. And they're sprinkled in there, by the way. I'm going to be speaking with a guest on the podcast who I've known for a few years. And, what's interesting to me is that she was able to find a purpose, gosh, right away. Right away, she found a purpose. Where for me, it took me a long time. It took me 7, 8 years to really feel comfortable in my purpose. And there's nothing wrong with that because she's still grieving her loss. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well, how, nobody is the same and each person is going to grieve in their own way. And it doesn't mean that just because she found a purpose before I did, that she's feeling better, than me. That certainly isn't the case. Or she's farther along than me. No, she's still grieving. She's still grieving. She's still got that, pulsing emotions. She still has that little grief blob there. And so I'd like to get your interpretation, your feeling about this grief blob. And why do I want to know this? Because my purpose is to help you. And I want to know what grief feels like to you. And not only what does it feel like to you, but what do you need to release that grief? I want to be able to provide that. So, if you want to see the pictures that I put together, the video of this grief blob, you can see that on my YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in the notes so you'll be able to see that link and head on over to leave me a comment. You can comment on this show. You can send me an email, go to my website to contact us. So please reach out, let me know your thoughts, and thank you for listening.